No.
Okay. So this is lecture 2 of the Dead Sea Scrolls series. So today we're going to talk about an issue we touched on a lot in the Q&A, which was really the scandal and ultimate publication of the scrolls. But I went through Schiffman's chronology, so we'll discuss it in a very detailed chronological way today and really understand what happened and start to get a glimpse of what's actually really in these scrolls. And then next week, we're really going to go really right into what really the scrolls have to say themselves. Okay, so first of all, we're talking about the discovery of the scrolls. So some of these scrolls were actually found before 1947. Many of you have heard of the famous story of the Bedouin boy who found these scrolls in Qumran. But where do these scrolls originally pop up? Well, some fragments actually were found in the late 1800s in the Cairo Geniza, the Cairo Ben Ezra synagogue. It was a famous old synagogue in Cairo. Now, at the time when these fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls are found, no one realized they were fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Later on, the people would connect the dots and realize that originally these were Dead Sea Scrolls that wound up in this Geniza, or basically collection of papers which are being stored because they're holy papers and we're not going to throw them out, so they're simply stored. Okay, when Solomon Schechter heard about this, who was a leading scholar who was on the faculty of Cambridge, when he heard about the discovery of the Cairo Geniza and all these ancient Jewish documents, which really would shed a lot of light on Jewish history, he went to Cairo in 1896. So a lot of different things were found. A tremendous amount of texts were found, probably been accumulating for many, many, many years at this point. They just 1 minute, everyone. Girls, I'm in a meeting. Could you lower, please? Sorry. Thank you. So they found text of Ben Sira, which is an apocryphal work, wisdom literature, and 250,000 items, believe it or not, were found. A lot of these really had significant historical significance, giving us a window into what was going on in the ancient world. But for our purposes here, what's most important is what was found was part of the Damascus document, which is a text that later on was also found in Qumran as well later on when it was discovered. So that's how eventually they realized that this document that was found in the Cairo Geniza originally came from Qumran. It was the same text found there. So before Qumran, by the way, there was a lot of debate as to whether this Damascus document was really the work of early Christians, Zadokites, Sadduceans, Karaites, or a Proto-Rabbinic sect. So Zadokites are a sect similar to the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the priestly elites during the Second Temple period, and Tzadok was the high priest, the high priestly family. So it was like the elite of the elite. That was Solomon or Shlomo's high priest was Tzadok. And the Karaites, of course, are a group that does not respect or recognize rabbinic authority. And later on seems to, as we discussed in the other history class based on Ruderman's work, basically became an umbrella group for people who are against the rabbis. Some of them weren't necessarily ideologically Karaitic in nature. They simply joined the movement that was anti-rabbinic. And some thought this text was a proto-rabbinic text. So no one really knew what to make of the text. And later on, it became clear as more supporting documents are found that people were able to connect the dots. Okay, so let's jump now to 1947 here. So the famous story of the Bedouin boy, whose name is Mohammed Adib, or the Wolf. So the story is that he was looking for his missing animal and happened to come across these scrolls. As Professor Schiffman said, probably not what really happened. His family was very involved in the antiquity trade, so he probably was really looking to find something of value there. And he hit the jackpot, even though it wasn't really such a jackpot for him. is he didn't realize how valuable these scrolls were. So he sold them for $125, which to him may have been a lot of money back in, particularly in 1947. But nevertheless, we're going to see people are willing to pay, even back then, a lot more. What he found was 7 complete scrolls. 4 of the scrolls were sold to Eliezer Sukenet of Hebrew University, and 3 were sold to the bishop of the Syrian church, who eventually later on would sell them to Yigdal Yadin, who is the son of Sukenet. He Hebraicized the name. He took on the Hebrew name. That's why it's a different last name, but it's father and son. And he paid $250,000 for them. So you see that they were very valuable. It's just one of these lucky coincidences. Yadin was in the U.S. and saw the scrolls. Someone was advertising to sell them in the Wall Street Journal, out of all places. He saw it. He was able to get them, and they now could be seen at the Book of the Shrine Museum in Jerusalem. So let's look at, for a minute, what's exactly in the scrolls here. We're basically focusing today on how the scrolls came to be and how they came to be viewed by the public. But let's look for a minute at what was really in these scrolls. Why were people willing to pay so much money and really put in a lot of effort to track down these scrolls in the first place? So what we have here is an incomplete manual of Isaiah, resembling medieval manuscripts of Isaiah. So this is a medieval period. Remember, it's before the printing press, so you don't have mass publication, you have manuscripts. And it's pretty similar to our current edition of what, if you open up a Tanakh and look at Isaiah, pretty similar actually. So it's reflecting the biblical Hebrew seems to be like you would expect biblical to Hebrew to be, and it's basically, they really think what was found here was a very early version or an original of what Isaiah really was. And just so people understand, scholars, I'm not saying this from a rabbinic point of view, from an academic point of view, scholars believe this Isaiah was really written by at least during 3 time periods, 3 Isaiah schools writing under the name of Isaiah. Remember, this was very common in the ancient world to have people write under somebody else's name, or to attach or have a group of people write something and attach somebody's name to it. The first Isaiah, most scholars believe, really talks about the pre-exilic period leading up to the destruction of the first temple, when Isaiah is prophesying to the people of Yehuda or Judah. Second Isaiah seems to be addressing Jews in Babylon in the exile. And third Isaiah is already talking to Jews who have come back and are really rebuilding the Jewish community in Judea, in Jerusalem and Judea. Okay, so and then we also have another version of Isaiah, a complete manuscript of Isaiah, but it differs greatly from ours, using Qumran Hebrew, which differs from the biblical Hebrew, and shows modern. And what we mean by modern is Hebrew from the time period of the Qumran sect. So the second manuscript of Isaiah, scholars believe, comes from the period of Qumran. It's later than the original, and it's written using language and references that clearly show someone was living later or the group who wrote this was living later. As I said last time, often the way you try to date a text is by the type of language which is used and historical references. So clearly, the second one is clearly the latter one, and it's written. We're going to see it's written from a point of view which really supports the Qumran sect's point of view. So what do scholars suggest? They don't know for sure, but they suggest perhaps the first text, both of these texts were found in the Qumran library, but the first text was probably a text which was basically meant to be an original. You wanted to sit down and simply read it and see what the original said, you do it. The second text was really more of like a commentary embedded in the text, which went for more of in-depth study. And I'll just give you a simple example. You think about the way we have a Kriyat HaTorah, public Torah reading in shul, where you just simply read from the text. But then you could also, you're sitting in the pew and you want to look at the commentaries in the Chumash, it's right there. So the second version, the latter version, which was probably written in Qumran, was meant to really be probably the study guide or so. So we have these two Isaiah texts. We also have the rule of the community, which deals with the underpinning of the community and regulates daily life. So that's a very, very valuable text we're going to look at. Not today, but in the near future as well, because it's going to really give us a flavor for what daily life was like for this group. And they were very interesting and I think strange in many ways sect too. We have a Pesher Habakkuk, which simply means it's Habakkuk with a commentary, just as we talked about how you open up a Chumash or a Tanakh and there's going to be commentary. So they have this commentary in the book of Habakkuk, which is one of the Treas, or one of the 12 quote-unquote minor prophets. And the only reason, by the way, these 12 minor prophets are called minor prophets is it wasn't they were less important. It's very simple. Their books were shorter than the books of, let's say, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. So it's not a great translation, but in English people always call them the minor prophets. They also found a Thanksgiving hymn, a text of a Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving hymns in plural, I should say, which the sect used to praise God. And this is similar in a sense to Tehillim. Like we have a book of Tehillim in the Tanakh in which we praise God. And by the way, they believe during the Second Temple there was a version of Tehillim book, or not book the way we would use it, but manuscripts of Tehillim, which was used in the Second Temple kind of. I heard one Bible scholar put it, Bernard Anderson, as basically it was the prayer book of the Second Temple period. And it's not really surprising when you think about it. You think about the Shir Shal Yom, the Psalm of the Day we do at the end of services every day of the year. We say the Psalm of the Day. Doesn't matter if it's a regular day or Yom Kippur, whatever day of the week it is, we have the Psalm for the day. And it's something basically that's at the end of services, and we kind of just zip through it and on to Mourner's Kaddish before we conclude services. But back then, this was done after the Korban, the sacrifices, where the sacrificial service was performed, and this would really end the service. And the Levium there, the Levites, would really, it would be a big production with musical instruments, and they do this Psalm of the Day, and it was really a big deal. So it seems like the Qumran sect also had their own version of this. Not surprising in the sense that the Qumran sect is leaving Yerushalayim. They're not happy with the high priesthood in Jerusalem. They think basically they're doing everything wrong, and Jerusalem is impure because everyone is not doing the sacrifices right, and all of that type, and they're immoral, all of these type of complaints. So they're basically setting up their own society, which is a holy society. And some of the procedures may emulate what was going on, except of course they're doing it in a much more pure way, and they're much more pure people. And speaking of that, we have the War Scroll, which really talks about like it's almost like Star Wars. I was watching it with my daughter the other day again, Star Wars. So like battle of light against dark, which ends with a cataclysmic battle ushering in a messianic era. So it really gives us this idea of eschatology and the end of time. As we said, the Essenes in general, and this sect certainly, really had this very apocalyptic view of the world is coming to an end, and we have to prepare ourselves for such. The other book found was the scroll found was the Genesis Apocrypha. We have that word Apocrypha again, hidden scroll, something that's not in the Jewish canon, but winds up nevertheless seeing the light of day. And what this does is it retells the story of Bereshit or Genesis, but it uses uses the wrong word. It retells it and embellishes some of the story. So it's really giving us more detail, almost in a sense like it's a midrash of the text, adding all of these details that aren't in the text of Genesis or Bereshit itself. So let's go back into our historical narrative of what happened with these actual scrolls here and how they wind up really being published. So in 1948, as we know, though Israel wins the War of Independence, Jordan winds up taking the area of Qumran. So it's in Jordanian hands. So as Professor Schiffman points out, the scandal of the scrolls in the 1980s and early 90s had nothing to do with the scrolls that were found by the Bedouin boy. They pertain to scrolls that were later on found by the Jordanians after 1948. We have these scrolls which are being found, and they seem to just disappear and are not being published. So what had happened here? So the Jordanians brought scholars in to lead the search for the scrolls here. So they had Father Roland de Vaux, a Dominican monk, an archaeologist, and G. Lancaster Harding, who was the head of the Antiquities Department after the British Mandate ended. And they were leading the Jordanian excavation team. So they had certainly people who had the right resume to do this type of work. So what happened here, and this is like something out of some sort of sitcom or movie here almost. Hard to imagine it happened, but it happened. So when the professionals left for the weekends to do their weekend relaxing, whatever they were doing, the same Bedouin boy who found the original scrolls would come back when no one was around. He looked for more text, found more text, and sold them to an antiquities dealer named Kando. That was a nickname. Again, it sounds like something out of a movie. But Kando was the guy who originally bought the 7 scrolls from him. So this boy is going back when no one else is there, finding more scrolls and feeding them to Kando. And these scrolls are basically them being sold in some sort of black market. They're disappearing. So in 1952, in caves 4 and 6, there were big discoveries found. Cave 4 had 550 manuscript fragments found. That was the biggest one. And by the 1950s, this boy is selling a steady stream to Kando, which he sold to the Palestinian Archaeological Museum in East Jerusalem, which is now called the Rockefeller Museum. Remember, this is East Jerusalem, so the Israelis don't have access to this yet, and that's not going to happen until 1967. Okay, so, Schiffman points out that you had Catholic and Protestant scholars were doing this. There's a myth that it was only Catholic scholars. It was Catholic and Protestant scholars. And he also points out, even though people say the Vatican was involved, there's absolutely no evidence that the Vatican was involved. It had nothing to do with the scrolls. Okay, and Jordan would not allow Jews to study the scrolls, as simply they wouldn't allow Jews into the area, so there was no Jewish scholars looking at the scrolls. Okay, then of course 1967, Israel wins the Six-Day War. Area of Qumran in East Jerusalem are in Israeli hands. Many of you have been to Qumran, which is right by Masada. Okay, so and this Jordanian team says they're going to work with the Israelis, and you expect the Israelis to get very quick access and want to have their own people looking at this as well, the Israeli scholars. But it seems to take a long time. Schiffman doesn't go into much detail. It basically says they simply wind up dragging their feet tremendously, and it takes the Israelis aren't getting the scrolls. So in 1960, a Reverend Joseph Oreg contacted Yedin, sold him more fragments, and Yedin had hoped for even more, like he'd feed him more fragments, but Oreg seems to just disappear completely. But then Yedin hears about this temple scroll, which I had mentioned before, and he's able to recover it from this dealer, Kando. So unfortunately, this temple scroll had been rotting under the floor of somebody's home in Bethlehem. So sad that this treasure decayed to a degree. Fortunately, it was found, but had it been found earlier, not left under someone's board, it probably would have been in better shape even.
Rabbi, you went silent.
For how long?
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
Yeah, I heard
Okay.
you fine.
Okay, thank you. So what I was saying is, in case I think that was Alan who maybe couldn't hear for a minute. So unfortunately, the scroll was rotting in someone's floorboard, under a floorboard in a home in Bethlehem. When you didn't get it, probably would have been in better shape had it been treated better, but he got it at least, and it's still a very valuable scroll. And Yedin acquired it on behalf of the Israelis. And importantly, what the scroll contains is a long list of Jewish laws here. So again, this is going to help us in a sense look at what was going on in particular with this sect, and as well just what's going on in the general Jewish world at the time. Okay, I can't read my last note because my it's being blocked here. So let me just go ahead. Okay, so most of the scrolls are translated. The scrolls are published in Hebrew, and then by 1983, most of them seem to be published in English as well. As we mentioned last time, a few years ago, a bunch of them were over at the Franklin Institute. I went to see them. It was really neat. I've seen them in Israel as well. So that is basically of how the scrolls came to public view. Okay, so let's open it up to Q&A. Just say next week we're really going to start diving into what's really in the scrolls, and again, how do they give us a window into the Dead Sea sect themselves, to this particular community, and what are they thinking, and what's going on in the greater Jewish world as well, which was very there was a lot of upheaval going on. This is going to cover the time period with the revolt against Rome. It's going to cover the time period preceding it, in which Jews are really forming different sects, particularly the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes, as well as other sects. So it's going to give us a lot of great information. Okay, and any question? Let's see, I have Marty, I think, and then Scott. Go ahead, Marty.
You were talking about the book of Isaiah that was written in a different Hebrew, more modern Hebrew than the traditional Hebrew. Just so I can get the dates correct, this is how I'm envisioning it. That classical Hebrew would have been the time of King David, maybe 1000 BCE, and the more modern Hebrew at the time of the Babylonian captivity at 586 BCE, because after that they were speaking Aramaic.
Right. So the earlier version is biblical. It's biblical Hebrew, which even though Jews are speaking Aramaic as their regular spoken language, as they're taken into Babylon and living in Persia, there's still clearly text being written in Hebrew. So so it's probably later. I mean, you think of King David, Isaiah hasn't even been born yet. You clearly have Hebrew is being used as Hebrew is obviously being used as a language, but we're probably talking about somewhere during the early Second Temple period is my guess, really, because that's when scholars really date the end of the Isaiah school. Again, I'm not speaking as a rabbi. I'm simply telling you what academics say here. So
you think
go ahead.
you were involved even when it wasn't used as a spoken language?
Well, there's a rabbinic Hebrew. There's a rabbinic Hebrew that is still very active, even as Jews are basically speaking Aramaic. As you have the rabbis are functioning in Hebrew as far as when the Mishnah is being written and things like that. And there's differentiation between a biblical Hebrew and a rabbinic Hebrew. So Hebrew is clearly evolving. And then what you have during the text that's dated to the time of the Qumran sect is you basically have a Qumran sect version of Hebrew. So, Scott?
Yeah, as far as the discovery of the scrolls, I just wanted to add, reading from some of Eisenman books and Michael Bajan's books. And they said when they found these scrolls in 47, the boy, it makes a nice story, but they said they knew that there were treasure hunters out there. And what they would do is, because the Eco-Biblique, the Dominican order that was invited by Jordan, they didn't go out there. They would send people out there, and these two treasure hunters, they would tell little kids to squirm into the holes, or they would drop rocks and they would listen for the breaking of the jars that had these things. I mean, it was done, the whole recovery of these documents was done in such an unscientific manner for these things to have lasted for 2,000 years, but yet they were discovered and handled in such poor way. like you said, I mean, a lot. We don't know when we see fragments, were they really in fragments in the caves? Because when they were first put, remember, they were all for the kids money for fragments. A lot of kids, they would tear these things. So it was really a sad state that these scrolls, how they were handled, and the fact that no Jewish authorities were allowed to even be involved. It's interesting that this Ecole Biblique is the same organization that was connected with the Inquisition. So they have a long line of not favoring Jews. And here, this would definitely be something that the Jewish community had an interest in seeing from the start. So there's a lot of sad issues about the way these scrolls were recovered. And like you said, under floorboards, they weren't put in, in any kind of environmental conditions. And even when the so-called scholars got them, they were handling with their fingers, smoking while they were pasting them together. It was really a sad, sad story that we don't know. Maybe maybe we would have had better scrolls, better conditions if they were handled more scientifically.
Yeah, I mean, as Schiffman also says, basically, this Bedouin boy is probably looking for it, and you basically had amateurs. These were not professional archaeologists, and they didn't treat them well. It's the spot where they excavated. I think I'm blanking out here. Not Sparta. I'm blanking. Troy. I'm sorry, I blanked out there for a minute. Ancient Troy. The guy who I forgot his name, but the guy who excavated it. Basically, this was his hobby. He wasn't a professional archaeologist, and they said in excavating the site, he did a tremendous amount of damage to it that can't be undone. Which later on, when the professional archaeologists got there, they were upset, basically saying he destroyed a lot of the evidence already. So, same type of situation, I guess. Jonathan.
So presumably these caves are under Israeli supervision now. Is there any suggestion that there's any more to be found, or could professional people with, ground searching radar and powerful lights? I mean, presumably everything's been combed over at this point, and there's no hidden scrolls somewhere behind a rock. I mean, is that like a statement that seems to make sense?
As far as I know, I don't know of any ongoing attempt to find anything new, even though you never say never. But as far as I know, everything has been combed at this point. And
yeah, I mean,
out there
went back in the late 1999, early 2000s. They went back with radar equipment. A lot of people have been back trying to use, non-contact search techniques to see if they can find anything more. And I don't think they've been successful. What they have, they think they've recovered what was in the caves.
Just wondering if there are other caves, because I remember learning that Jews were hiding in caves, not just one cave, but many caves over a fairly large area of land. I'm just wondering if other places were searched for caves.
yeah, I don't know what else was. I mean, there was the caves 1 through 6 we know about. I'm not sure about other caves in the general vicinity and what. I'm sure archaeologists did their due diligence as far as looking for that. Okay. Any other? I think someone else had a hand up. Someone is screen sharing. Hi, Sam.
I'm sharing a page from Wikipedia, the authority.
Okay, the authoritative source, Wikipedia.
And it shows 14 caves.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay, so 14 in total.
well, yeah, one of them, the last one is Masada. So they found either a manuscript which they call Masada, or there's a cave on Masada. I don't know. I didn't read the article.
Okay. Thank you, Sam. So, Marty, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, Marty.
Well, I don't have anything else.
I thought you had a hand.
No,
Jonathan?
no.
So update me on Jewish practice. So in 160 BC. So there would have been sacrifices in Jerusalem by the high priests of goats and live animals. Would these Qumran people have been doing their own sacrifices?
So you blanked out there for a minute, Jonathan. I lost you. You said,
I'm wondering who was allowed to do sacrifices if the Jerusalem priests were running it. If I were in a town in Galilee, like perfectly not extreme sect, could I be doing my own sacrifices, or they're all supposed to be in Jerusalem at this point?
no, so I mean, under Jewish law, the sacrifices are centralized. The Torah itself deals with that as a way of basically getting him ready to enter into the land of Israel. Now, later on, really, that's not, we don't see that actually happening. That's not the situation on the ground. We see a lot of these bamot, which like bima, these high places during the historical books of the Tanakh. So there's attempts to centralize under Hezekiah in particular, then even more so under Yoshiyahu. And and these obviously, there was political implications as far as if you're a priest in a small town and your altar is being shut down, it's not good for you economically, but there was a religious motivation too. And that was that it was felt that when you had multiple places to worship, it inherently led to syncretic practices, which simply is a way of saying the less centralized it is, you might not only be worshiping the God of Israel, the one true God, as far as we're concerned, you may be worshiping Baal as well. So it was brought under stricter control. So by 160, and then when the Dead Sea sect starts, which I think Schiffman estimates maybe 134, somewhere in that time period, there's an idea already that sacrifices only belong in the temple in Jerusalem as opposed to being decentralized. Now, I should note there was also a group in Elephantine, even during the Second Temple period. These are Jews who were actually soldiers originally sent to Egypt. Elephantine is the first cataract in the Nile River. It's a little enclave island, and they actually do build a temple of sorts and bring sacrifices. They actually appeal to the Jerusalem temple during the early Second Temple period, saying the the Persians, who are really controlling the area, they say, please let the Persians allow us to start sacrifice again at our temple in Elephantine. The authorities in Jerusalem never wind up interceding on their behalf, as far as we know. Probably they were not interested in having sacrifices take place anywhere else except the temple in Jerusalem. Religious purposes as well as political, financial purposes as well. They probably didn't want the competition. Okay, Scott?
And to follow up on Jonathan about the sacrifices, they may have been these Qumran sect may have, remember, they felt that the temple was being desecrated, it wasn't holy anymore, but it would be restored. So my feeling is that they didn't do sacrifices out in Qumran because they felt that, this judgment they would occur, and when the God would restore it, they would offer sacrifices in the purified temple again. So they probably were vegetarians. I know they were bathers. They only bathed in cold water. They were very strict about their diet. They probably imitated, like when Judah Maccabee, it says that he only ate vegetables when he was out fighting. He didn't eat any kind of meats, but vegetables, things like that. So they probably did, but that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, the Qumran sect was particularly fastidious, I guess we could say, as far as ritual cleanliness, wanting to make sure they were in states of purity. This was really a big deal to them. And they did believe, as Scott said, that the priesthood in Jerusalem, through impure practices and pure behavior, simply was not living the appropriate lifestyle to do so. So good follow-up point, Scott. Okay.